These days, the more people I talk to who are becoming Catholic are drawn in by the beauty of the liturgy, the smells, the bells, the actions of the Catholic Mass, the sacraments, the trappings, the altar, the tabernacle, the incense, the standing and kneeling, and all these aspects of the Mass are drawing in converts en masse these days into the Catholic Church. But why? Why is it important? Why are the actions that we do so fundamental? What's going on at a Mass? When those things are missing from the Catholic Mass, what have we lost? This week, I am joined by liturgist Chris Carstens, one of the most phenomenally schooled guys on the liturgy, to talk about the importance of what's happening at Mass, the trappings of the Mass, why it's so attractive, why it's so beautiful, why it's important, and why you should check out a Catholic Mass just to see what's going on and absorb the beauty in that celebration of the beautiful liturgy of the Mass. It's an amazing episode, guys. Stuff in here for everyone. You will learn something new, and I think enjoy yourself along the way. Please watch and enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are listening on podcast, welcome. Hello. Please leave a rating or review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Those ratings and reviews help to push the podcast out to more listeners, and thank you for listening. If you are watching on YouTube, hello YouTube world. Thanks for watching. Hit the bell, subscribe, like this video, interact in the comments, guys, and help us to grow the channel. And thank you so much for watching. I am joined, much to my deepest pleasure, by Christopher Carstens. He directs the Office of Sacred Worship in the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin, coordinates liturgical studies at Christendom College, and edits the Adoremus Bulletin. Those are all fantastic things. He's the author of A Devotional Journey into the Mass, A Devotional Journey into the Easter Mystery, as well as The Principles of Sacred Liturgy, Forming a Sacramental Vision. He and his family live in Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, and I'm absolutely pleased to have him. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and hello.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much, Keith, for having me on.
Thrilled to have you. I told you before the show, I'm an absolute liturgy nerd. So these kind of conversations for me are just a personal pleasure. Listening, viewing audience, I could care less what they think. Guys, this conversation is just with two guys who love liturgy. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Look, the liturgy, so I'll tee this up for you, Chris, in this way. When I talked to Marcus Groda, I hosted The Journey Home probably 6 years ago on this program, and I asked him what the two reasons why people became Catholic were, and he said it was the authority issue, wrestling with scripture and authority, and finding a home in a tradition that has magisterium that could really rule on these kind of doctrine and dogma issues, or it was the early church. People who looked into church history found the early church, found the Catholic Church in the early church, and converted that way. I would propose cordially, this is the show, doing this show for 6 years since then or so, that the third way has got to be the liturgy that converts people into the Catholic Church. The beauty of the way we worship as Catholics, the smells, the bells, the trappings. At the same time, and this is how I'll tee this up, the evangelical who sees, because I was in that camp, and many listeners to this camp, this show, are in that camp too, that sees the smells and the bells, and sees the liturgy, the vestments, the ritual prayers, the standing, the sitting down, the kneeling, the sacramentals, might be put off by something like that seems ritual or ceremonial and utterly kind of inaccessible to the ordinary evangelical looking into the Catholic Church and the Catholic Mass. So my question, with those two things in mind, the attracting power of the liturgy, the repulsing power of the liturgy, what are we to make of that interesting kind of juxtaposition in your mind as somebody who loves the liturgy?
Yeah, well, a couple things. Let's start by its attractive power. I think people are attracted to the liturgy and the rituals, the signs, symbols, smells, bells, and all the things like that for a couple of reasons. One is because it's really based on the incarnation, that Jesus, the invisible God, became visible and audible and smellable and touchable and edible, So there's something about that to the liturgy. The liturgy is kind of a continuation of kind of the sacramental of the incarnation, put it that way. And maybe the other thing is our own natures, whether we like it or not, are sort of they're hardwired for sacramentality, for smells and bells. If we were just angels or something like that, we wouldn't need this kind of sacramental medium. If we were just dogs or cats, we wouldn't need we wouldn't have these spiritual truths, but we're not. We're sort of body and soul. And so how we communicate is through sensible media. And this is what the liturgy is. A Catholic liturgy is very high on this, right? Whereas much evangelical or non-Catholic worship is very low on this. It's more word-based, if you want to put it that way. And so I think it's attractive to us because of our Redeemer and because of who we are. Now, the danger in this is that you can sort of slip too far into sort of a mindless type of ceremony or a ritualism. It's not a compliment to be called ritualistic. So, and what happens then is you just sort of slip into autopilot or rote or something like that. And you think to yourself, I'm just going through the motions here and I've lost track of what this is all about. Or you think to yourself, either independently of that or as a consequence, well, why don't I just go directly to Jesus, directly to God, without all of this stuff in the way that I'm not really quite sure what it means anyway? Wouldn't that be easier? So I think that, to my mind, that's what explains sort of the attraction of and the repulsion of the Catholic ritual system.
That's good. That's good. I think as you're saying that, what occurred to me how strange it would be, because I left my evangelical church. The one that I was formed in, I was formed in the charismatic movement in a Pentecostal church that I moved out from, and as my wife and I got married and obviously like expanded our horizons, and but that church that I'm thinking of, that original church, was barren, Chris. We had a cross, not a crucifix, a cross on one corner of the church, and the rest of that church space was kind of bare. Now, you go back there now, that same church, on a Sunday morning, there's smoke machines, there's spotlights, there's amplifiers and guitars, there's kind of special effects, laser grid stuff going off. So it's kind of ironic maybe that non-liturgical kind of worship, it was very much, like you said, word-based, as kind of incorporating more smells and bells than I think they'd be comfortable admitting at this point, maybe.
Yeah, this is, now I'll admit up front, this is a little bit out of my league, but I asked a friend once about how, why, basically the question was, why do non-Catholic Christian churches, why are they more beautiful than Catholic churches? I mean, we're the ones who claim to be high on sacramentality, and some of the 16th century reformers were the ones that said, no, you don't need any of this stuff. Well, how come their church is better looking than my church? And what my friend recommended is that kind of what you're suggesting here is, they pulled down the statues and they removed the altars and they got rid of the images and made it very scriptural based. Nothing wrong with being scriptural based, of course. But I think that they've learned that lesson already, that some of the non-Catholic Christian denominations, and they've discovered that you can't fight sort of the sacramental nature of people. And so they've already responded to that. Well, we're kind of late to the game, some of us Catholics with, painting churches beige and, stripping down things and stuff like that, and I think you'll find this in Catholic practice and culture and parishes today too. There is a response, especially among younger people, that, hey, there's something missing here and I want that back.
Yes.
I want the incense and I want the chant and I want, the beautiful vestments and the rest. So,
yes. I think you're absolutely right. And I want to take a big chunk of time discussing the future of the liturgy with you and those ideas. But I want to, so let's lay out, first of all, maybe the purpose of liturgy. So outwardly, right, for the evangelical looking into the Catholic Church, we talked about what they'll see. They'll see, right, they won't probably see the smells and bells in many cases in many parishes because of maybe attempts to make things more accessible. We can talk about that in a second. We'll bracket that. But what they're seeing outwardly is, say, a priest's investments and ritual prayers and an altar and very physical trappings, which would be kind of foreign to them. So when we're thinking about the liturgy, what could we say? What's the purpose of all that? An evangelical might ask. Like, we have in our church none of these things. So why do you guys have to have these? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. I, again, let me try to answer from two different ways.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
the liturgy is the worship of the Church of the Trinity. And so that's one thing that sort of makes it different. It's a collective worship. It's how the mystical body of Christ worships God the Father through Christ her head in the Holy Spirit. Okay? And so why there's this ritual ceremonial component is anytime a corpus, a body gets together, there has to be some sort of order of events. Say this first, then move there,
Yeah.
then do that, then sit down, then read this, and everybody has to agree on that. And if everybody does his or her own thing, then it's chaos. Then your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing, and your foot doesn't know what your ear is doing, and all of the rest. And so that, I think, is one reason why we feel that we have to do this. I mean, we do it because we think God is telling us to do it ultimately, not just we think it's a good idea. But the other reason is too, I think, Keith, is that, the goal of a Christian's life is identification with Jesus Christ. And you're like, okay, well, what is Jesus Christ like? Well, it's not the outfit or the clothes he wore, the beard. Am I more like Jesus because I have a beard than, my wife or something? No. Well, Jesus, sort of his threefold, I don't know, the way he redeemed us is as a prophet, a priest, and as a king, right? So he taught the truth. As a priest, he gave his heart to God the Father on the cross. And as a king, he served his people. And so baptized people who do this very well are called saints. They're called saints. But you have to have all of these components. Otherwise, you're like sitting on a two-legged stool. If you only have two of these, you're going to fall over. So to be a saint, to identify with Jesus, is to think like Jesus, to love and pray and worship like Jesus, and to serve people like Jesus. And so as our own, growth in holiness, it's a constitutive part of that. It's not enough just to be really smart about the scriptures or the catechism or something like that, or to be really generous in how you serve people. You also have to be able to join your heart to that of Christ and give it to the Father. So it's an essential part of the job description of a Christian. We have to do all of these things well. So that's why we do it.
Yeah, I love that. I became Catholic 10 years ago, and I recently took a friend of mine to Mass. And as I'm sitting there trying to put myself in his shoes, you forget these things over a decade of being a Catholic. But I began to really pick up on the amount of times we use sacrificial language in the liturgy at Mass. And I'm sitting there thinking, what is this guy thinking is going on here? Because in the evangelical mind, a Sunday morning church service, it may have a kind of liturgy, right? There is this, okay, we'll read the gospel here, and then we'll play some music, and then while the pastor is praying, the band sneaks away, and then when everyone opens up their eyes after the prayer, they're gone, and it's magical, and the pastor's there, and he expounds the word of God for an hour, and then he prays. When we're praying, the band sneaks back up, and they play another song, and then the service is over. Well, there's no concept of sacrifice in that kind of a very low church Sunday service. I'm sitting here in Mass next to my friend thinking he's hearing again and again the language of sacrifice. I wonder what he thinks is going on here. But this is a fundamental difference, and central to what the sacrifice of the Mass is, right? It is not simply a gathering of us together on a Sunday morning, right? It's a sacrifice, right?
Yeah. And this was one of the misunderstandings, I think, among some of the early reformers in the 16th century, that a sacrifice was something that we do. The sacrifice of the Mass is the sacrifice of Jesus that now he lets us join ourselves to. Yeah. So it's not principally by any means an action of us. That's one thing I suppose is a good truth to know about the liturgy. It's like the Trinity is like doing 99% of the work at Mass. They're doing all the heavy lifting. And this is an occasion where they invite us, the body of Christ, now that we're incorporated into his body, to join in what Jesus did. So what Jesus did is he offered perfect glory to the Father, animated by the Holy Spirit. And this is he's giving us an occasion now to say, see what I've done? Now, come on, everybody, join me in this, and we'll all do this. We'll all do this together. So the sacrifice of the Mass, which is the sacrifice of the cross, is the offering of Jesus' whole being to God the Father. That's what pleases the Father about this. Not that we happen to be torturing and murdering his son. That's not pleasing him. Why he's pleased about Calvary is finally, here's someone whose whole heart is turned to me. And that's the core of the sacrifice. And this is what we're called to do at Mass, is to join our hearts as fully as we possibly can with that of Christ and give it over to the Father. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, not just for, people are interested in the faith or non-Catholics, but among Catholics too, about the nature of sacrifice and what it is that's happening at the Mass.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is the aspect, maybe bracketed to the side, that the Mass isn't meant to be evangelical, right? It's not meant to be an outward facing, let everyone see what we're doing here and join them in. It's meant to be for the initiated, for one thing, right? There's a process in place that's existed since the early church for a reason, right? To initiate people into what's happening at a Mass. But then, like you say, Chris, those who are Catholic in the pews, who may become those ex-Catholics who join those evangelical churches and say, "Oh, it was just ritualistic. It was just smells and bells. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus when I was Catholic in that Mass." Well, those people who we have work to do in informing what their knowledge of what's happening at the Mass, right? And I know that's something that you taught me, Chris, is the importance of Vatican II's active participation in the Mass, what we're called to be part of that action of the Trinity, right? And not only bring something ourselves to Mass to, quote unquote sacrifice, but be taking part in that ritual, not just going through the motions, right?
Yeah. So this call of active participation has been around for more than a century. Pius X used it, and 1903, the council used it, and right after the council, which ended in 1965, many people took to mean, everybody needs to be doing something, visibly engaged in some kind of action. But anybody who has a role to play or fulfill at Mass or any worship service knows that can almost be a distraction, because you're worried about, am I going to sing this right? I'm going to say this right? What's my cue? But the key question that people who are serious about active participation should ask themselves is, in what activity am I participating? Right? And that's fundamental. And the answer to that question is, I'm actively participating in the saving action of Jesus, his Paschal mystery. And if you don't know that, then you're going to try to participate in something that is that's different from the core. So I sort of think like a really beautiful snapshot of active participation is Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus to carry the cross. Simon of Cyrene is actively participating in the sacrifice of Jesus. Okay? And that's what we're called to do, is to put our own bodies and souls and minds and blood, sweat, and tears into and join with Jesus in offering that sacrifice to God. We really need to see what's going on kind of behind the signs and beneath all of the symbols and the rest.
Yeah. And it's like, as you point out, Chris, it is a very an unfortunate misconception that the idea that means you must have a job to do. You must be part of the fear of the new Catholics being asked to bring the gifts up during the Mass. It's always a thing. Like, everyone needs a job. Someone needs something to do. That's not what was meant by active participation.
Oh yeah, I think we well-intentioned Catholic people do a great disservice to recent members of the church, converts or people who've joined the full communion by saying, "Hey, great, you're Catholic. Now you get to be the lector." Yeah. Like, wait, what? Or the usher, whatever it is. As if just joining your whole being to that of Jesus and glory and praise of the Father is not enough. You have to do something else.
Yeah. And then there's, the spirit of Vatican II haunts many parishes still, right? We could say. And there is the sense that, okay, so this active participation means that we must find ways to incorporate people in a liturgy. So here's an example that we can both cringe at in a second. But I was at a church that will remain unnamed where the pastor of that parish during the Mass invites up all of the youth, under 20, to gather and hold hands around the altar and do a little kind of a spinny circle while they sing this song. This is the interpretation of that particular pastor, and I maybe I shouldn't speak so derisively about this, but of what that meant to have people take part in the liturgy, right? That's not what. First of all, that's not the kind of dumbing down of the liturgy that attracts anybody, right? I've done this show for 6 years. I've talked to converts years before that on the journey teaching RCIA or OCIA. Nobody is becoming Catholic because of those dopey kind of dumbed down liturgies, right? That's never what's happening. But that unfortunately is how some parishes, and you mentioned too the beigifying of church structures, right? The painting of the walls beige, the kind of dumbing down of the beauty of the church. These things aren't what was meant by helping others to take part in the liturgy and the life of the church. Right?
No, they were not. No, they were not. So when Catholics think of how they worship, right? We worship with signs and symbols, with rituals, right? And what this means is we use a whole tapestry of things you can see, smell, taste, touch, or hear. And so like singing the Sanctus is like a musical sacrament, if you want to put it that way, because by singing it, you make an unseen reality present, or the beauty of the church entrance, or the vestment a priest wears, or the fact that you worship on Sundays, all of the things that we use, the incense, right? So this is the sensible medium by which the Paschal mystery of Jesus is communicated and presented and revealed as really in this year that we're living in, as it was 2,000 years ago. So the question that the liturgical movement before the council and then the council itself was grappling with is, see, the church has been working on a sacramental ritual system for centuries, right? The church is the bride of Christ. She knows what she's doing, and she's trying to find this ritual system that says Jesus, okay? And, by the time we get to the late 20th century, some of these have been duplicated needlessly. Some elements have dropped away. Some things have been, had really served to obscure what the mystery was. And so what the council wanted to do was sort of restore some of these signs and symbols, simplify some of these signs and symbols, restore some of these signs and symbols, not because we thought it was cool, not because it was the groovy 60s, not because of any type of thing, except that we wanted the ritual system to shout Jesus, just to make him as manifest as possible. Well, the decades following the council were a little bumpy, weren't they? And we thought, well, maybe standing around an altar, singing, saccharine songs is a good thing to. Well, it's not, right? It doesn't reveal Jesus in the way that her bride wants him to be revealed. It presents an obscure, shadowy, ugly, oftentimes, depiction of the face of Christ. And as you said, that doesn't attract anybody. So kind of from 35,000 feet, that's kind of the story of, what the council was trying to do and kind of what went wrong. And, what I think is being restored now is a type of ritual, type of ceremony that is more authentic to the tradition and reveals Christ more fully to us.
I love that, Chris, the idea of meant to reveal, meant to shout Jesus, right? Because of course that's what happens when you encounter bad liturgical moves in a parish, or a parish that's kind of whitewashed itself, right? You're obscuring Jesus by removing those pieces that were there, or not celebrating those properly in a mass, you're doing the opposite, right? Then you're making it ugly versus drawing that beautiful our attention to the beauty and to the Christ the eccentricness of the liturgy. I'm thinking of, and maybe this is getting too nerdy, but the ancient role of like porter, right? The ancient liturgical role of porter. And I'm thinking about we there's some lovely gentlemen at our church, and we have 4 kids, and 3 of them are lovely little girls. And there are several older fellows at our church that just love to open the door for us on a Sunday morning, but then get in the way and try and get in the girl's face and tease them or tickle them or kind of block them, right? And it's silly and it's cute and it's well intentioned. But you think about, opening a door seems like a pretty non-liturgical, pretty kind of base action to do. But this was an ancient role in the church for a reason. And you can see in that, in this case, are we accentuating Jesus in this moment, welcoming in my family to mass, or are we terrifying these poor little girls and making the experience of mass into a bit of a horror show before they even get into the building? So, I mean, that's a goofy personal example, but you can see the ability of each and every action in the liturgy to obscure or to point towards Christ, right?
Yeah. It's a real skill. It's a real art. If you think sort of the principal minister, I mean, Jesus is the prime minister, but the principal human, actor is the priest, and he's supposed to be in the middle, because that's what a priest does. He mediates between these opposing sides, heaven and earth, God and man, the fallen and the redeemed. He's supposed to be in the middle, but not in the way, right? And I think by extension, the lector, the cantor, the servers, the people, the porters, whatever they are, need to kind of have that same principle too. They need to be a conduit of encountering Christ and not an obstacle to that encounter. And sometimes we can get in the way of that. And the moment I step in the way and the liturgy and the mass starts to look more like me, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
It needs to look like Jesus, not like me, as swell of a guy as I am. I'm not Jesus, and I'm not going to redeem anybody. And I think this really is a skill. But I think one of the things, and I'm going to out nerd you right now, Keith, but
Please do.
But hang with me here. This was one of the most insightful things that I've ever read, and it was from a convert to the church named Louis Bouillet. Okay. And he talks about these early sort of errors about Jesus, right? Was Jesus a creature, or was he entirely God, right? And of course, he's fully human and fully divine. He has 2 complete and unmixed natures, right? He's not one or the other. He's not some mixed together. But what he suggests is these same sort of errors about Jesus can be errors about how we worship. Is our worship almost exclusively, or is it leaning too human? It's just like a group of folks getting together and, just having a good time and talking and like we normally would, or stuff like that. But the other error was a Christological error too, and it can be a liturgical one too. Is it so like untouchable and unreachable, inhuman, almost weird, robotic, something like that? Well, those are both errors. And so somehow our liturgies have to be fully human and fully divine. So when you go to Mass, you continue to be a human being, okay? And you're not supposed to check that at the door, but you don't turn into some stiff, weird, aloof, robotic type of thing either, right? And this is true of the priest, the porter, you and me and our kids, right? And it can, I think you probably have in your mind's eye examples of both. People are just like, don't look at me, don't touch me, leave me alone, and okay, but that's, and then there's people who are just, they can't wait to give you a hug, and Anyway, so it's this balance for ministers and all of us.
Yeah, but you're right, because I'm thinking of, our kids are crawling all over the pew and dropping, littering Cheerios up and down the aisle, maybe, right? But so there's that messy human aspect to it, right? Because there has to be, but there is that elevated sacramental aspect when the Sanctus bells ring and all the kids, their heads pop up because they know that Jesus is coming in that moment, right? In that part of the Mass. Something holy is happening there, right? That is the mix of those two things. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think that probably, unfortunately, I mean, I'll give you one example, and this is the example of, I think, many converts to the faith. I came into the church, and I was in a place in my life before we had kids, and things were a lot more casual. I could go to the gym, believe it or not, and then to daily mass every morning, and then go to work. And it was a beautiful routine that I managed. But I was there at daily mass for a couple of weeks, and the priest who brought me into the church, he was an elderly gentleman. I think he was probably in his late 70s. He passed away a few years after this. But he said to me, I'm so glad to see you here, because nobody ever comes back after they join the church. No one ever comes back. And I thought, well, first of all, this was a very sleepy parish that I unknowingly kind of signed up for RCA, and I did my sacraments. So I can see why people who are serious might go through the motions there and then go to a different parish that has a bit more going on. I get that. But his joy at seeing me there, and his excitement that I was somebody that kind of stuck around, right? Kind of struck me as, well, that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the case. But here we were in this church that was really stripped down. It was a beautiful church built in the late 1800s. It had, at one time, beautiful aspects to it, but the candles were replaced by those horrible electric candles, which I know you have a problem with. Right, and the walls that would have had beautiful mosaics or paintings were whitewashed. Now, the joy for me in this is that that church, after a few pastoral changes, is now absolutely exploding at the seams, and they're using that beautiful building and restoring those aspects back to how it would have been. But you can see that somebody who's drawn into the church through the beauty, right, would get there and get in the ground and then encounter these masses, these buildings, these liturgies that really are devoid of that beauty that should have been there. It's not being accentuated, right? It's just that human aspect of, let's kind of get this done in this drab building and get on with our day and go somewhere else, right? So that's the experience of many a new convert, where that human part, like you said, Chris, gets in the way of what should be more of that balance, right?
Yeah, let's go back to this line from the Second Vatican Council about the rites should be distinguished by a noble simplicity. And many took that to be, beiging the church and stripping down and making things bare and mundane and earthly.
Yeah. Or electric.
Yeah. Well, wait till you hear this. Maybe the electric's better. But
no.
the line, the Latin text, which I know a handful of Latin words, and one is the rite should be it's called fulgeant or refulgent, which in English we have a word called refulgent, and it means shining, bright, brilliant. In Latin, a bolt of lightning is fulgor. It's related to that. So the idea is that when you go to Mass, it should be like going up Mount Tabor, where the divine beauty, right, the beauty who is God himself, the divine beauty shines out and radiates out through material things. But again, the sort of the big question is, which material things and how are they used? See, and this is where the church says, I have an answer for this, because I have been working on this ritual longer than I've been alive, the church says. A lot of what we use in the, think about if you went to the Easter Vigil, right? There was a little sacramental reenactment of a pillar of cloud in the thurible and a pillar of fire in the Paschal candle, and a guy dressed up like Moses in the person of the priest, and the chosen people leaving a land of darkness and enter. I mean, so long before the church was even born from the side of Christ, the God's sacramental plan was in the works, right? So if you want to go to a beautiful, refulgent liturgy, it's one that is intelligently faithful and inspired by the Spirit in the rituals of the church. And it's not what your Dawson liturgist cooked up, or your pastor, or anything like that. We're trying to be in the middle, but not in the way. And what's so really wonderful about the liturgical life of the church today, I mean, it's always been the case, but Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, they've all started to use this term called Ars Celebrandi, or art of celebrating, which is a podcast in itself. But I think the point to take away is the church speaks about the liturgy and thinks about the liturgy in terms of a work of art, as a masterpiece. So beauty is the name of the game today, at least coming from the magisterium, and I think from the ground up, about the nature of the liturgy. It's got to be beautiful, because God is beautiful.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's well said. Well said. I think there is, as you say, there is this kind of ground up swell, I think, underway, right? I think the most recent kind of analyses of the crop of priests, say, coming up are these say the black, do the red kind of priests, right? Who are faithful to what the liturgy says it should be, and celebrating that properly. I think, there was this for a long time movement to make the liturgy more accessible, as if that meant that would attract in more believers, or help Catholics to understand what's happening here in a better way. But we ended up with this Beijing, this priest kind of ad-libbing the liturgy, that kind of dumbing down of the liturgy, that what was meant to make it more accessible, but obviously hasn't been successful at that. But I think and as a result, right, there is this kind of groundswell, I think, happening where those Catholic converts coming into the church, those priests who are being formed, are that more liturgically conservative, if that's the right word to use, which it's not, the more liturgically kind of traditional, which again, that's maybe the wrong word. But this is what's going on if you look at the actual raw data, right? This is the movement back to the liturgy being the liturgy, and letting it be the liturgy, right?
Yeah, I think, and this is a big complicated question, but I think, part of what befell Catholics after, if that's the right word, after the council was kind of a jettisoning of things traditional.
Yeah.
And I think the motivation was, well, nobody knows what this means because it came out of the 14th century. So let's get a sign or a symbol or a piece of music, a hymn, or, some relevant talk or something like that would make it more accessible to people. The instinct is not bad. The liturgy is always meant to speak to a particular culture and people and things like that. But generally, the weight of the liturgy is Godward. Devotional prayer is more originates with us. In any case, but the thing is, Keith, I think this other line from the Second Vatican Council, that is from Gaudium et Spes, this document on the church in the modern world, and it's John Paul II really picked this up and made it sort of a hallmark of his papacy, that the Son of Man came not only to reveal God to man, but man to himself, right? And so if Jesus is the real substance of the liturgy, then there should be some anthropological truths about the Mass and about the liturgy. It's not just telling us who Jesus is, it's telling us who we are, right? And our mother is the church, and she's trying to again, make us better human beings. Mass makes you more fully human.
Yes.
And so I think these things that were set aside immediately after the council were felt humanly. I don't think these were, people sitting around talking theological truths. Maybe they were, but I think they were felt absences in how we worship. There's this lack of transcendence that, everything became so imminent and mundane and casual and human. And those are good things because we're human beings. But the casualty in this was God. Elvis has left the building. Where is God in all of this? And so, yes, I think there's a movement. I think especially Pope Benedict saw this. I think many of the younger clergy see this. Many Catholic lay faithful have a desire for this and to see this too. But it's also, I know this expression about do the red and say the black. See, but even there, like a robot could probably do that. Right. So we want, and a priest, when he puts on the chasuble, he doesn't come some automaton. He remains, this flesh and he's as manly as Jesus was. Right. And so his own prayer, I think, is I think priests are pretty well formed now to pray and to lead. I mean, all of us are works in progress, certainly. But it's a big, confusing, exciting question and time to be, learning how to pray like a saint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of, friends who are in seminary and who are formative, who are those young priests out there, and some studies that someone like Joe Heschmeyer, his podcast, Shameless Popery, did a great job of analyzing the kind of the tendencies, the beliefs, the self-identified kind of theological leanings of the young clergy coming up these days. And there is that, I don't want to be the priest ad-libbing the liturgy. I want to be the priest who's celebrating liturgy according to what it is. So I take your point. Yeah, they're not automatons. At the same time, it's obscuring, right? When you are at a celebration of the Mass and the priest is making up or adding pieces to say the consecration or prayers around that, right? And I get the tendency, right? I get and I think this is understood that that's not somebody who's intentionally trying to, I don't think in most cases, insert themselves into the liturgy. They're trying to make that more accessible, more friendly. I think that's the tendency, right? But unfortunately, if you are somebody who is trying to pay attention, trying to take part in that liturgy, and suddenly the words are different words than you've ever heard before in your life, that's taking you out, right, of that moment where it's meant to be God word. Does that make sense?
It does. I think maybe something I've come to appreciate more in my own mind and in teaching people, about, and I alluded to this before, and you mentioned it again about being God word and about the language we use, is I think that Catholics and even non-Catholics need to realize that the liturgy isn't the only way that the Catholics pray. Okay, that as really a necessary complement and supplement to the liturgical life is personal prayer life and devotional life. And to be a mature, I think, Catholic, you have to have both of those things. And it's in the devotional life and in the prayer life and in the home that you can pray any way you want to. You could wear what you want. You can use any types of words that you want. You can kneel down or stand up or jump around on one foot, whatever. And it's in the personal, it's in that devotional life and prayer life that it really gets unique and tailored to you. You go to Mass, you're a collective, but we all have our individual virtues and vices and areas of growth that we need to give to God and have him address that. So I think that's a good truth and if we go back to these decades following the council, well, let's go even back before that. The caricature, believe it or not, was, that, my great Catholic grandma wasn't paying attention to the Mass at all. She was doing little flower novenas and praying the rosary, and Grandpa was out smoking cigarettes, during the homily and stuff like that. Well, there needed to be a shift, a refocus on putting first things first, which was the liturgy. And I think what happened after the council is, we got rid of those devotions, pretty good. Everything was liturgy, and that's all it was. And I think the liturgy was forced to bear the weight of all of the personal desires that everybody had, because they weren't finding outlet or expression or anything like that in a devotional life or a prayer life. It had to be at the Mass. I want my song at, this is my wedding, and this is how I want it done, or this is my funeral, whatever it is. But when these two things, coexist as they ought, I mean, this is when real growth starts.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, let's do the fun stuff for a bit. The Catholic who's been in the pew for decades, the Catholic who is new coming to the church, the non-Catholic Christian who's looking into becoming Catholic and looking at a Mass and wondering how these things all fit together. What are some things that all of those people can do to make the Mass mean more, to make the Mass more Godward, more what it should be, to take a deeper role in the Mass in the way they should? What are some hot tips for folks at Mass, Chris?
Well, I don't promote parish shopping generally, but I think the priest and his assisting ministers have an obligation to celebrate the liturgy the way the church wants it to be celebrated, so that it's not about them, it's about going to Mount Tabor. And if so a beautifully, faithfully, intelligently celebrated liturgy is a great place to start. Okay, because if Tabor doesn't exist, or it's a cloudy, I guess there was a cloud there. I would say go to a place where the liturgy is really refulgent. Okay, that will help a lot. Now, the second thing I guess I would say is pay attention. Pay attention. That what it said. 90% of life is showing up and paying attention, right? And so go there and notice. I worked for when I was in college. I was a janitor at the Newman Center, and kind of this grumpy old chaplain or pastor, and he's always yelling at us for missing things. And he'd say, "What did Mary do at the wedding feast of Cana?" I don't know. He said she noticed. She noticed they were out of wine. You people don't notice anything around here. And then he'd go on and litany. But that's a lot of it, is notice the door. Yeah. Jesus says, "I am the door, and I stand at the door and knock." And notice it. There was a door that was guarded by the cherubim, who now wait to worship you as if you were God. That's what Jesus, that's on the Office of Readings on Holy Thursday. These cherubim are waiting for you at the door. Notice this. Notice everything about the church, how it smells different. Good, I hope, candles, the burning candles, the incense. Notice the floor. And hopefully it's not all, shag carpet or something like that. Notice the windows. Notice the vestments. Notice the ministers, how they carry them, how they talk, how they sit. See, because this is that sacramental medium that Jesus is coming to us. And, if I'm, zoning out or something like that, not paying attention, not noticing anything, well, a lot of that's on me. So that's a second thing. And I guess a third would be, don't think you need to understand everything. Not even the first time, but for the rest of your life. The Catholic Mass is not like a class. It's not a catechism class. It's not a lecture hall. The minister is not giving lessons. Okay, it's like a work of art that has many media. It has music. It's got choreography, meaning not dancing probably, but gestures. It's got fabrics. It's got architecture. It has art. It's this multi-layered work of art. So maybe you've seen these like 4D Van Gogh exhibits. You go and it's like Starry Night. Well, that's what the Mass is like. So just notice and don't think you have to figure everything out. God's coming to us in 1,000 different directions, and just soak it up.
Ah, I love that. There are tons of places to take part in the Mass, take an active role in the way our bodies are positioned, in the way we respond to gestures and to prayers and to objects and pieces of the building itself and the furniture, in the church. There are lots of ways that we can foster, and I would hope that by us taking part in that, it would encourage others around us to take part in that and encourage a more reverent liturgy for everyone involved. What are some ways we can, what are some things that maybe the new Catholic might not recognize are things they can be doing actively that we're meant to do and maybe have been lost, that would hopefully bring everyone else along? Because if I'm the lone guy bowing at the words Lord Jesus Christ and everyone's looking, what's this guy doing, that's gonna ask some questions, right? And bring others along. So what are some things we can do, the people in the pew, to encourage a beautiful reverent liturgy for everyone?
No, that's a great question, because I think, and here I guess I'm not entirely speaking to like new Catholics, but like when the liturgy's bad, it's always the fault. It's always the priest's fault, isn't it? Right? We always blame him up there. It's never our fault out there in the nave and the pew. It's always it's the lector's fault. Yeah. Well, these poor priests probably looking out in the nave saying, "What are these people doing out there?" So there is. You make the point that's so good that you're making is, we have stuff to do there. We are not spectators at all. We're active participants. But again, you don't have to have a degree. You don't have to work for the parish to do this stuff. You don't have to go through a boot camp or anything like that. Now, there will be some familiarity that you should be at peace about, that you might stand up at the wrong time, and that is absolutely okay. That is okay. We have a little bit more flexibility as laity than the ministers do in the sanctuary. But I would think, on your way to Mass, calm your mind, turn that radio off, and just enjoy a little bit of silence. I mean, you probably find your ears are ringing just because there's no noise for a change. So enjoy the silence, be silent. It's okay to close your eyes, be prayerful, sit up a little straighter, stand up a little taller, make the gestures a little bit more intentionally, just a big, beautiful sign of the cross. Even if you do it wrong, I mean, go for it, even if you're going to sing a wrong note, sing it nice and loud. Just go all in, be at peace about it. But it's about, for the laity, right? It's not about musical roles. It's about listening. It's about singing. It's about responding. It's about the postures. It's about giving your heart, putting your heart on the altar, at the Eucharistic prayer. It's about doing your best to listen to the word of Christ in the Gospels. It's about just letting all of your senses take in Christ, so that he can transform us. Is that still too abstract? I don't know.
No, that's fantastic. One thing that you taught me, Chris, is the importance of so many of the things we see in that building, right? The importance of the altar as this, as a thing that is baptized, as a thing that receives its first communion, right? The importance of reverence towards the tabernacle, and the importance of good vestments, and the importance of understanding the role of incense and holy water. So many, this is maybe my own personal soapbox, but so many parishes these days, when you walk in, it's like an evangelical church. Everyone's talking and everyone's just hanging out and hey, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a week. What's new, right? And then the priest comes in and no one shuts up until the organist or the pianist begins playing like the processional hymn, right? And you mentioned the smells, and of course, well, how many parishes, Chris, smell like incense anymore? Because incense is reserved for one time at Easter. Mm-hmm. But I think these are the things, like you said, poor pastor is the one that gets the grief. But these are the things I think that the laity can begin to do, right? We can go into Mass and begin Mass quietly, me and the 4 kids who are better behaved than some of the older folks who are chatting away and walking up and down the aisles, right, and sharing. We can be the ones who may suggest, hey, Father, can we bring out maybe some incense for this mm-hmm. feast, or can we have a bit more of this, right? That isn't I think you're very wise in saying it's not all the blame maybe falls on the priest, right? But we as the laity can begin to do these things that elevate the liturgy, right?
Yeah. Well, we can all we all presumably have some degree of control over ourselves, right? And we can prepare to hear the readings, and we can prepare to give our prayers, works, joys, and sufferings. We can, when the priest says, "Let us pray" at the opening prayer, we can actually pray for a change instead of just not doing it. So those are things that that we have. We can't blame anybody but ourselves if that's not happening. Now, about the actual ritual elements, I do think that we should. We have every right to in charity to bring our desires to the pastor, legitimate ones. That you would smell incense for a time, or that maybe the Easter Vigil should start in the dark. Father, I get it. We want more people here, and the temptation is to start that earlier so we can have more people. But sort of there's so much of the sign value. We could have the Easter fire right inside the door, or we could build a big one out there. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Things like that. We don't have to have incense at every Mass, but hey, we're in the Easter season, or we don't have to sing Gregorian chant at every Mass, but at least sometimes throughout the year. And I just want you to know, Father, that because he's probably, I don't know, he's probably not doing those things because he's opposed. He's trying to make, everybody happy about the liturgy. Absolutely impossible. And if he knew that members of his flock were desirous of these things, I said, okay, we can do that. We can bring those desires to him.
And I think as the last thing I want to chat with you with in closing is that the future of the liturgy, right? And we said before, and I think this is the taking the temperature of Catholics who are, first of all, converting to the Catholic faith, and numbers of those are substantial these days. There's some pretty promising statistics coming out in that respect, and there's some pretty specific kind of wants and needs and perspectives of a lot of these new converts, and dare I say the youth, the Catholic youth, right? There's a desire for a return to more of that kind of traditional liturgy that looks and smells and feels more elevated, right? That has those times of silence, that has those times of chant or of prayer, of incense, that the sign value of those things of the Mass are increased, right? Are more intentionally felt. Like we know from studies, this is the direction that the liturgy is going. I think, we all kind of felt like, well, I say we all, liturgy nerds felt like, when Pope Francis began to kind of maybe, in quotes, suppress the traditional Latin Mass, the hope was that the beauty from the Latin Mass would kind of would flow down into the Novus Ordo Mass that we see in parishes, that the quote unquote regular Mass would become more elevated if we didn't have these two trains of these two different liturgical tracks taking place here, right? And I think that's the desire. We know it's a desire of the Catholic youth, right, and newcomers to the faith to have that beauty. I wonder, do you think I'm accurate in saying that? As somebody with boots on the ground and doing the work that you do you think that's the direction it's going? And what can we do in the pews to kind of help that along? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. Well, this was when Pope Benedict wrote Summorum Pontificum. This, both Francis and Benedict had this desire to effect a reconciliation at the heart of the church. But beyond that, one of the things that Pope Benedict wanted was this sort of mutual enrichment, that some of the more traditional elements would find their way into the post-conciliar liturgy. And I think that very thing has happened, because I do think there are very many people of all ages, but especially the young, who are desirous of more traditional things. And just because you desire tradition doesn't mean necessarily that you want to go to the TLM or something like that. Some people do, but you can love tradition and love it in the post-conciliar Mass. And this is, I think, exactly what is happening. Is I was telling somebody the other day, Keith, that 25 years ago when I started in the liturgy, the common questions on a weekly basis were about ceramic chalices and holding hands at the Our Father and where's the tabernacle. Today, the common questions are ad orientem,
Yes.
altar rails,
Yes.
and there's some other, but that's what's happened in 25 years.
Yeah.
And, I think that the liturgy is a traditional thing. I mean, it just is. It's meant to be traditional yet contemporary, so that people like us can plug into it.
Yes.
But it's come from somewhere, and I think we're appreciating that more and more all the time at all levels.
Yes. And so for the parish priest, the pastor listening to this program, the tendency to dumb down, to make more accessible that kind of mass. There was a time when the crowd that liked that, they're getting older. If we're going to make the mass contemporary and accessible to the Catholics who are coming up, who are raising kids in the faith, who are joining the church, that accessibility looks like a traditional, a properly, beautifully, reverently celebrated mass more than it does that beigeified kind of. I almost said happy clappy. That's a bit too offensive, I think. But yeah. Right, that accessible mass looks more like what people that are accessing that want, that more reverent, beautiful mass that comes from what the church says mass should look and sound and smell like, right?
Yeah, and you know what? And our priests have a difficult task on many fronts, and this is one of them. Yeah. But on the other hand, what he's asked to do is to celebrate out of the missal. You don't have to go to a workshop for this or anything like. It's in the missal. These options are in the missal, and so to use them with intelligence and prudence and love and an ars celebrandi, I mean, that's where it's at. Now, for our part, what can we do for this is get on the same page of the missal with the priest. And so whether your own personal tendencies are progressive or conservative or traditional, whatever they might be, in some ways, the liturgy doesn't care.
Yes.
Okay? That I mean, you in your private prayers, you do whatever you want, and the church will be the last person to say don't do that. But when you come to the liturgy, everybody has to kind of check, in a certain sense, his or her own desires and likes and dislikes at the door and say, hey, I'm stepping into something so much bigger than myself. And it's not about Father's likes and dislikes either. Yeah. Let's all get on, let's all take on the mind of the church and celebrate from her rituals that have come out of this beautiful tradition that we've been given so that we can become holy men and women in 2025. So
well said, Chris. One of my final thought is this: one of the things that drives many converts to the Catholic faith is the fact that the church, I always say this, I have for a couple of years now, the church doesn't care what you think. The Catholic Church is the Catholic Church. Its beliefs are what it believes, right? And that's a beautiful thing, because for many evangelicals who kind of chose their own faith, chose their own church based on their interpretation of the Bible and what they thought was true and right and good, coming into the church that really doesn't care what you personally think, it just tells you, we believe this, take it or leave it, right? I think that's a wonderful, beautiful thing for many converts, although it sounds a little bit rough. So when you say the liturgy also doesn't care, right? That's just part and parcel with the beauty of what you're, in becoming Catholic, your preferences are secondary. The church says, here's what we believe, here's how we do this. This comes from Christ, our head. Take it or leave it, buddy, right? But that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we've tried to do it yourself. We all know this. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So yeah, let's join something bigger than ourselves.
That's fantastic. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I want to thank you for your time. Look, I'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes. Is there anything you want to highlight for listeners, for viewers, that you think they should check it in particular? Otherwise, I'll just put links to your stuff in there for them to find.
No, well, I'd say if you like what you heard in the interview, then the Adoremus Bulletin is more of those things. And Anyway, yeah, hopefully you'll get the same type of insights or whatever they are in any of those outlets. So, but thank you, Keith, very much. This, yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you, Chris. Listen, God bless you, the work you're doing for the church. It's fantastic. And thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.